Do you ever wonder how the pros transform drums like this to this? Well, in today's video, I'm going to walk you through step by step exactly how I mix these live drums. Okay, so step one, and this is the first thing that I always do just before I quantize or edit any of the drums. I like to phase align the drums together. For the moment, I'll just run you through quickly how I do this. Now, there's no real, way to do this perfectly, or everyone has different approaches. Some people use plugins, but I usually just do this by hand. Can't remember exactly the engineer I heard say this, but he said try match it up to your main overhead. What I would do is I would literally just take my kick and I would just try and match it up as tight as possible with the left overhead and just make sure that the transients match. And I would just do this for all the sounds, like the snare as well, especially because we don't want any phase issues going on. This would really just kind of like a lot of the work that we would put into creating the sound for the kick and snare would just get mushed up because the phase relation isn't working correctly. So that is always step one. Step two for me would just be cleaning up the tracks. So if there's any parts of the drums, like the start and the end, or if there's a break in the middle, you just want to make sure that you cut up each part individually. Just want to make sure everything's tidy, which leads me into quantizing the drums. Now, this is a very controversial topic. Obviously, some people are still in the old days that don't believe in quantizing drums and putting them on time, which is totally cool. This is not what this video is about. I'm not going to debate that, whether that's right or not. For me, the way things are worked now, you can really hear the difference between a quantized drums and not, especially if the drummer, not in this case, but in many cases, you find, people just starting out making music. You can't expect them all to play like pros. So quantizing the drums, just even when it comes to having a professional drummer, it's just an aid and a guide to allow the whole band to record on something that's perfectly on time. Obviously, you can choose how drastic you want to quantize things. Like, I don't like to put everything to the grid, so I like to have a bit of movement throughout the track, but not just enough movement to the point where it doesn't feel like it's moving and going off the click. The quickest way to go about this for me, I like to section up each part of the drums before I even start thinking about quantizing it, because every part of the song has different play, and I don't want to just quantize the whole thing because each note and all the subdivisions could be wrong. So what I like to do is just start at the start and go up until the drums change. So for this song in particular, you can hear between the chorus and the verse, the drums change. So what I would have done when I started out this, so I would literally just take all down here and cut it and then make a marker to know that that's my verse 2. And I would then select all the drums here. And in Pro Tools, we use something called Beat Detective. Now, I know in other softwares and DAWs, you have different kind of quantizing plugins, or even just, what's built into the DAW. But this works best in Pro Tools. So I think the shortcut for this is Control and then numeric pad 8. There we go. So this is Pro Tools Beat Detective. This is what I use to quantize my drums. I'm going to quickly run through what I do anyways. So for this case, I'm capturing it at 16th note. I'm going to click Capture Selection. Then what I do is I analyze it. So this catches all the transients of the drums. So as you can see here, it's these lines that aren't on a transient. You want to try and get rid of these. So you do that by just pulling the sensitivity back. And as you can see, as I pull it back, some of those lines disappear. So it's just capturing all of the, kick and snares really. And, obviously sometimes the hi-hats, but I mightn't catch every single hi-hat. Again, it really depends on the song. So next from there, I'll just click separate. So I'll click that. I'm not going to click it now. It's already done. I go to clip conform, and I would conform them. This is now Pro Tools moving everything to the grid. Obviously, the strength is how much you want to be perfectly on the grid, 100% being everything's on the grid. And then the more you dial it back, the more that will vary. You click conform, then go to edit smoothing. I usually like to keep maybe like a 5 millisecond crossfade, but this is just ensuring that there's no like clicks and pops every time there's a cut on the grid. And you click smooth. After this process, I now want to make sure that Pro Tools hasn't affected my transient of each kick and snare that I've put to the grid. Because what can happen is when you crossfade, what Pro Tools likes to do is fade it like that. And if it's on the grid like this, it'll just go like that. And what happens when you do that is essentially your kick is just the initial punch of the transient is just getting smoothed out. So every time you hear that kick, it's not going to be that full transient, which is not what we want. So I would manually go in and make sure that every part is smooth. And if you can see here, I've pulled all of the crossfades back individually. I'd like to do it as a whole line, so like I wouldn't just do one at a time, otherwise that would take forever. So I would just pull each of them back a small bit. So moving on to step 3, we are now going to start approaching each individual element of the drum kit. So for me, I'd like to start off with the kick. If I have 2 kick mics, that is brilliant. Kick inside and out, obviously. Then I'd move on to the snare top, snare bottom if I have one as well. These are all things that if you can get them, do. If you're the recording engineer, obviously sometimes you're not able to do that simply because you're not recording the drums. After that, I would then, if there's any toms in the songs, you know, floor toms, rack toms, whatever, move on to those. At the end, I'm moving into the overheads. And if there's a hi-hat mic as well, then I'll bring that in. But mainly I like to start off kick and snare first, see what samples need to be added, and just go from there. So I've started off with this fantastic gate. This is the Silencer by Black Salt Audio. For me, it's just the best gate because it's just so simple to use. You don't have to like think about attack and release. Really, like everything's just done for you, and you're going to see how simple it is. I'm going to take it off, and I'm going to bring it in, and you'll hear the difference with and without. So as you can hear, that really just perfectly kicks out that kick mic, and it just allows me then to have a clearer source, and that is the most important thing. So when I'm mixing a kick, I always like to start out with an 1176, just bringing out that transient with the slow attack and really quick release. The 1176, as you probably already know or not, is a really, really fast compressor anyway. So even though I say slow attack, it's still pretty quick in relation to other compressors. But what this attack and release is doing is just allowing the initial transient of the kick to come through while bringing the attack out of the kick. So this is with that on. So as you're seeing, I'm not getting more than 3 decibels of gain reduction. I mean, I could have pushed it more if I wanted to really shape that kick, but I was really quite happy with the way it sounded, and I just felt like I don't want to just over compress everything, because once everything comes in and once I'm going through my mix boss at the end, everything's going to get pushed back anyway. So I tried to keep the transients as much as possible in the individual stages and just try attack it later. After that, I just have this EQ on the kick. I'm really just rolling off a small bit. 5 dB at 95 hertz in a low shelf. The reason I did this is we're gonna get onto it later with the kick trigger I used. So I really just use this kick as more the kind of punchy and attacky transient kick, whereas I'll deal with the low end with a sample later on. So as you can hear, it's really just taking out that high end, you know, that click of the kick. Moving on, I then have a sample. Essentially, you can use any plugin you want. I use a plugin called AP Trigger. So this is it. I just load in my favorite kick, whatever. You can find kicks everywhere, all over the internet. I just wanted one that had a bit of sub and low end, because again, I was using my source kick, my real kick, as kind of that high end mic. So this is that kick on its own. Again, you can hear it's really low endy. There is still a bit of top on it, but the way that it just, you know, works with my other kick really did it for me on this one. So that is my kick. Obviously, I'm going to get to reverbs at the end. I usually don't do them straight away. I like to build a kit and come back to it. So next, we're going to move on to the snare. So with this snare mic, I couldn't really gate it. There's a lot of ghost notes going on, and I really didn't want to lose that, by trying to make the sound too clear. So this is again where I say gating is a case by case scenario. So with this mic, I literally just wanted to bring out the best parts of the snare I could, and then use samples to fill in the parts that I needed. This is the snare completely raw. And now this is with. Now you might be saying to yourself, yes, you can hear the hi-hats a lot more, and maybe the sound of the snare on its own isn't fantastic, but that's okay, because everything is done for a reason, and I wanted to use this snare mic for a particular reason to fill out what I couldn't get from samples. So if we start off with the chain, all you can see is I'm just rolling off a bit at 110. Then I'm using an 1176. Went for a different color on this one with the black with the blue edition, but again, getting around 3 dB of compression, nothing crazy. Then we come to my SSL EQ on this. So I'm using a small bit of the compressor here, ratio around 4:1, really quick release, and just hitting that 3 dB, just barely touching it. Then when it comes to the EQ, I have a low shelf. I'm boosting a small bit at 100. Then we move up here. I'm cutting a bit at 6.5K, and I'm boosting a small bit at 3K. Very unconventional way of doing that. I could have done that down here, this high shelf, but I wanted to use the shelf instead of just a band. So that's why I opted for the high shelf up here. Now I am using a limiter on the snare, which is quite crazy, but I felt how much I wanted to push the sound of this snare in the track. It was really bringing my level overboard, and especially when we go into my mix boss later of the drums, the drum boss, you're going to see that the transient of the snare is going to be here and the kick is down here, even though they mightn't sound that way. So I really just wanted to take down the dynamic range of that snare so that when it came to, pushing into the mix boss and even mastering, I wouldn't have that just cut off, because, you don't want that. So I wanted to control that now. I then added another SSL EQ after. I felt like I just wanted a bit more color on the snare. So here I'm just kind of undoing things I did before while adding other elements. So it's just really allowing me to it's just shaping the sound the way I wanted to. When I'm mixing it, I'm not thinking too much about, oh, well, I already use an SSL EQ. Why do I want another one? It's like, no, if I'm missing something, I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to, get it to a point where I like the snare, not to a point where, it's technically right to do or not. So again, this is just bringing out the sparkle a bit. So for the snare bottom, here we have pretty simple chain, just the Pro Q3 knocking out again at 100. It's exact same space as my original snare, my snare top. And I have a DBX 160, just hitting that snare bottom. Usually I try catch it to the -10, just so it just comes back straight away. It's really, really, really quick compressor, and it just gets that transient, it just increases the attack of that snare bottom. Now I know there's a bit of level in that, but also you can hear what it's doing to that snare bottom. It's just bringing it out, all that character, and bringing it out in a really nice way. This is the snare trigger that I opted for in this song. So as you can hear, there's a bit of snare buzz on it, but with that, that's kind of my top end of that snare. But there's also this really warm, kind of thick element to it, and that's what I wanted from the kit, but I didn't get it from my mic. So this was the best way for me to allow that feel into the kit. So if we play all three snares together now with the processing that I have on this trigger, I think I just pushed a bit at 3K, a bit at 8, and then another bit at 1.5, and I really just pushed all parts of this snare just to really get that low end up here. See, I'm pushing it at like 200 to give me that just that low mid kind of boost, which is what I was missing from the kick, from the snare mics. So this is what it would have sounded like without the bottom and without the trigger. Now with. As you can see, there's just so much more weight in the snare, and it just adds another element of depth to it. So finally, this song actually didn't have any toms, but my process would have been exactly the same. Small bit of compressor or compression, touch of EQ just to sit it nice within the kit. But I really like to let the overheads do the most of the job, and if I needed a tom or whatever triggered, I would do that. So really simple approach to these overheads. Didn't do too much. As you can see, I'm using pretty much the same plugins as before. I'm cutting a bit of the low end at 170. I have a bit of a dynamic boost here. This is just for the snare to bring it out of touch. As you can see, it's a dynamic EQ, so every time that frequency goes over a certain limit, it pushes it. I set it to a point where every time the snare hits, it goes over. So if you really look at that again, you can see that coming up every time the snare hits. After that, then I have another 1176. This is really just catching that snare, and it's just making sure the snare doesn't pop too much, because I already have a lovely sound from my snare in, my individual mics and my sample. I don't really want to be adding too much of it when I bring in that overhead sound. Just adding a bit of top. I'm not doing anything with cutting. I don't even have a filter on or anything. I'm just boosting a bit at 9K and another small bit at 4.5, 5. This really just brought out the kit and just made it a bit, sparkly at the top. And then with that, I'm compensating with this soothe just to make sure that I haven't gone a bit too crazy and it comes harsh on the ear. So have a listen to the cymbals with this on. So it's just really just taming those harsh frequencies. Finally, I just have a hi-hat mic. I've literally done nothing to this, just cut the low end. Like, really simple approach to these drums. Like, there is cases where I have gone more crazy in terms of processing on drums, but these ones just turned out fantastic, and there's very little going on individually. Again, once we move on to the drum bus, what it's being driven by, that's a different story. But for the moment, this is where we're at. Okay, so now that we have the whole kit mixed, I'm going to start running through my mix bus for the drums. So my drum bus, I have everything routed to the track, to the aux pre-drums, which is this right here. So on this track, I am driving into I'm pretty sure it's 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 instances of the NLS bus. You can pause the video and copy these settings. This is a Jason Joshua thing, but this is usually used for hip-hop drums. But essentially what it's doing is modeling after, the real desks and boards, and running things through them with the saturation and getting that kind of not tape sound, but that saturated kind of run through the desk hot sound that I really like. And I like to just push this to a certain point that feels nice. It adds an element of thickness in the low, and it just smooths out that top while giving a bit of drive to everything. It's really a color thing, but there is a big difference when I take it on and off. So I'll show you now with it off first. So when you turn it on and off, you can see really the difference between the depth, and also there's just an element of just a focus that's lost. I mean, you can hear it in the kick, especially. Like, the kick and snare just tighten up so much when you have all these channels on. Moving then into my drum bus, I'm going straight into the SSL G bus compressor. So with this, I have a slow attack, really quick release. This is, again, get those transients, get the attack working. I have a 2:1 ratio, so I'm not doing crazy, and I'm pretty sure... Yeah, really, really light compression. Like, the most I'm getting is 2 dB, minus 2 dB of compression. But this is to help me later on, again, with mastering. I don't want to have the snare transient metering way too high. I want to just control all these peaks now, so I don't have to worry about it later. So then I'm running into the black box which is a saturation and harmonic enhancer. It basically, what it adds is level without it reading. So it's perceived loudness. It essentially takes your track, whatever level is at, it brings it down, but it makes it sound louder. It's really magical, weird stuff, and yeah, it's crazy. It is game changing, especially when you're trying to get loud masters. This is the first tape emulation going on in this kit. I usually like to put this on the overheads, but for this particular song, the sound of it going straight through the drum bus was just fantastic. So I'm going to show you what that's doing. So again, it's just adding that tape saturation, this glue almost. You can feel that little boost in the low end that the plugin is doing behind the hood. But yeah, fantastic. It just really, for me, it just smooths out everything and just adds that bit of, again, like I said, glue, but it just makes the drum kit feel natural and breathe to me. So then finally I'm running into this, well, not finally, there's one more thing after this, but this is the last kind of tonal shaper that I'm running into. To be honest, this was the first and last time I used this plugin. Not for any particular reason, I was just trying it out and I thought it sounded good. I'm not sure exactly what's going on here because, again, I didn't properly research it. But if you want to use these settings and try it out, I'm using it as a parallel anyway. It's pushing in with the drive, and I think there's a small bit of compression going on. So I'm really just using this as like a parallel compressor with, some parallel distortion and saturation at the same time. But yeah, you can hear that with on and out. There's not a lot of it anyway. There's only like 13%, so nothing too crazy. Then finally in the chain, this is the last step and secret to getting your drums loud without them distorting or losing their character, and it is a clipper. I'm using this standard clip from Sir Audio Tools. I've been trying to experiment with the gold clip, I think, and the orange clip as well for hip hop. That's another fantastic clipper, but for the moment I'm still using the standard clip. This is my favorite clipper. It's just so easy to use, and this soft clip saturator sounds incredible. So what I'm doing essentially is taking the peaks of mostly the snare in this. A lot of times the snare, I like to push my snare loud and then cut it. So what that allows me to have the kick and snare kind of at the same level, but not be removing that transient of the kick, which, I think the kick is the most important element. So that's kind of how I like to do my things usually. But again, it really just depends. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing here and explain it after. As you can see, these red peaks here, that's the snare. So that is getting soft clipped with this unit right here. I have the soft clip saturator on 4%. This is just adding some things that are being removed when you're clipping them. But essentially this is giving me, like the black box from earlier, it's giving me level without the meters reading. So I'm here gaining like 1 to 2 dB that I wouldn't have had before if I didn't clip these. I could have gone a lot crazier with the soft clipper and just touch the kick, but I like to soft clip in mastering as well, and I master my own stuff. So I pull back here because I know I'm going to clip again at mastering with the vocals and the bass and guitars, everything in. So I know that I'm going to do a bit more later on. So I was kind of held back a bit. But if you wanted to clip these more, you could. But there is a point where you don't need to. It's just up to your taste at that point. I'm going to bring in some of my reverbs now. I like to add reverbs near the end as just kind of like a character to see if I like them. Also, it really depends on the actual mix of everything. So these reverbs, I would take them with a pinch of salt. Like, I think any reverb sounds nice. It just depends on the context of it and how you use it. So this is what's going on with the reverbs. I just have a reverb I just have a Lexicon 224 on the snare, which is just giving me a bit of color. Just just giving that snare, just it's holding out that sustain of the snare, making it feel bigger and lasting longer. I have this Abbey Road chamber on the kick. This is again just adding more weight to that kick. Just really, it's doing pretty much the similar job to the snare. But I felt like with this Abbey Road chamber on the kick, I just got a bit of something out of it. And to be honest, I didn't even dial this in. I just felt like I needed something on the kick. So when it comes for me and reverbs, I don't overthink it. I just pull up a reverb, find a preset that sounds nice, and push it in, and make sure that it sits nice in the mix, and that I'm not doing nothing that's affecting the mix. So yeah, that's pretty much my entire process on mixing drums. I usually would add a bit of more, like distortion on the individual tracks, like a decapitator on a kick or the snare. But in this case, I just felt like I didn't need it. Anyways, thank you very much for watching this, my first breakdown video. I'm hoping to do more. I hope you found it interesting, or even, helpful at all. And if you have any questions, make sure to leave it down in the comments below. And also subscribe too if you like the content. I'm going to bring more and more breakdowns, different things, recording, mixing, even producing, just different tips and tricks and whatever I can bring to the channel to help people out. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.